All right, so today we have our monthly kind of roundup of newsy items with my friend Paco Nathan, founder of Derwin, which is a boutique consultancy focused on data and AI. And we have big news. Paco just joined my good friends at Sensing. He is now the principal developer relations engineer with a focus on graph AI and graph intelligence. So Paco, always welcome back to the Data Exchange podcast.
Thank you, Ben. Wonderful to be here. I'm coming live from Fort Collins, Colorado.
All right, so let me start. And I guess I've kind of I've avoided this topic, Paco, but since now it's coming, it's heating up. We are in the great state of California, headquarters to all the foundation models I use. So OpenAI, Google Gemini, Anthropic Claude, and Meta's Llama, right? And the big news here is this Senate Bill 1047, titled the Safe and Secure Innovation for Frontier Artificial Intelligence Models Act. So it's a handful. It's a massive bill. I'm not going to cover everything about it, but I'll give you and the audience a high-level overview. First, it has a classification of models, right? So there's the notion of covered model, which is a model trained with, I guess, 10 to the 26 floating point or integer operations. And based on that number, a covered model would probably exceed $100 million based on average market prices of cloud computing at the time of training. And then from there, it starts defining other model types, right? So non-derivative covered model. So this is a covered model that has been trained independently without using significant portions of another model. So this excludes fine-tuned models, right?
Yeah.
Then there's the notion of the derivative model, right? So this basically is derived from another model. And then open source AI models. So these are AI models that are freely available, freely modified, and redistributed. And then I guess there will be an advisory committee advising the frontier model division. So, and then you get to the actual regulations, and there's a lot, right? So there's pre-training requirements, post-training requirements around, I guess. So for example, pre-training requirements, there's safety requirements for non-exempt models. So implement robust testing around safety, maybe even cybersecurity measures, comply with relevant guidance from NIST, and then post-training capabilities, right? So I guess keep testing on safety and security. And then there's models in use, before initiating commercial public use, developers must implement safeguards to prevent hazardous capabilities from causing critical harm. So on and on. So you have, on the one hand, a taxonomy of models, and then a list of requirements based on the model type. So, as I'm reading this, obviously I'm going, so this is it's the same people who run the DMV will have to, I guess they will have to staff up first of all, right? I mean, to validate that, okay, I'm a covered model, I'm a non-covered model, I'm open source. And then how do we do the actual, the auditing of safety and all these things? I mean, given the state of the state and the budget deficit and
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, I guess it's one of these things, Paco, maybe great in principle, but the devil is in the details in implementation. And imagine, and you might find yourself in the crosshairs of this, once you folks, for example, the sensing start having models for entity resolution that you might want to share or release or whatever, right? So,
Yeah, it can spill over into a lot of different companies. Exactly.
yeah,
Very
yeah, I
quickly.
don't, I don't want to really pass judgment other than I think, like I said, the intent might be good, but the details are hairy.
Yeah.
And so I think it will just cause confusion and just basically really kind of slow down people. And also there's not enough details in the mechanics to really understand what it is you're supposed to do, right? So
Well, is there anything in this in terms of like the committee updates? It just seems that some of the numbers they have are very strange because this field is evolving so quickly. How can we set a threshold today, knowing that laws going into effect and getting staffed up and executed, it'll probably be years before whatever we decide today takes effect. So how is there a way to like update any of this?
yeah, I mean, speaking of updates, there's an annual compliance certification, right? So developers of non-exempt models must annually submit a certification of compliance signed by. So basically, you kind of say that you're self-certifying, it sounds like, but then obviously they're just making you do that. So if something goes wrong, they can go after you, right?
I mean, it does seem like they would be targeting about a half dozen entities. And so it's not, there's probably not everybody is going to be building this large of a model. So it really is speaking to a limited set of entities for that kind of level of audit, but then it spills over into so many other organizations using it.
Yeah, but so there's the covered model, which sounds like one of these foundation models.
Right.
There's the non-derivative model, which is fine, so excludes fine-tuned models, especially if you modify, it's not full parameter fine-tuning, so it's you modify some of the parameters, but not as much. But then the thing that is a little more broad though, Paco, is the open source AI models.
That's what I was wondering. Yeah. What kind of distinction between open or closed?
So they
What do
have
we
a
mean?
whole set of regulations governing open source AI models, and then yeah, it's just and then they have requirements for computing cluster operators as well. So maybe this is the not just the cloud computing platforms, but this emergent services like RunPod, Lambda Labs probably are
Sure.
covered, right? So
Sure.
must implement policies and procedures for customer due diligence and risk assessment when customers utilize resources sufficient to train a covered model. So in other words,
Yeah.
if you go to one of these operators and are about to train a big model, then those operators now are supposed to, I'm not exactly sure what they're supposed to do, file paperwork or what, right? So, I mean, like I said, maybe if they're gonna do some regulation, maybe just do something less ambitious and a little more targeted and a little more
Yeah.
operationally practical, right?
Well, it does sound on the surface, it sounds a bit like banks and KYC regulations and yeah, it's extra work, but it's being done and it serves a purpose and it's fairly pragmatic. If we could get to that, like what for what purposes or how is something being trained? My question though is this in effect yet, or is this scheduled to be going into effect?
So there's a lot of confusion. I think it's basically still in the amendment process.
Okay.
So basically, I think that some people are saying it's implemented, but it's not, right? So it's still they're still haggling over the details. But like I said, so take it at face value that what I kind of have in front of me now is close to final.
Yeah.
So they're going to implement this. So I mean, they're going to have to build a whole staff and bureaucracy around this thing, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And how long will that take? Yeah, It sounds like you said, it's lofty goals, but very dubious execution.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, the you know the and then you have to kind of there's AI safety incident reporting, right? So developers must report any AI safety incidents affecting their model
Yeah.
to the frontier model division within 72 hours.
And what does that even
Establishing,
mean?
yeah, yeah. So what is a safety incident? So a lot of these things have to be defined, right?
Yeah, Clem DeLang was writing some analysis of this on I think on LinkedIn earlier today. Clem DeLang from Hugging Face, and just pointing out that it's kind of working the opposite of what the stated intentions are saying, which is unfortunate. I mean, it would be great to go after these kind of goals and have legislation that was effective and all, but this seems to be doing the opposite, probably doing more damage toward innovation than what they're trying to accomplish.
And, as residents of California, and we probably have both interacted at some point with the state bureaucracy.
True. For people who aren't in California, when Ben and I are talking about DMV, it's an experience. I've lived in several other states, but California is a true experience for DMV.
Yeah, I think, like I said, so I don't know how this will play out. I'm hoping that the legislators come to the conclusion that, hey, we may have to dial back
Yeah.
and dial back on the scope. I know probably there's part of it, probably there's some pride in it too, right? So we're California, we're home to all the foundation models. We don't want the Europeans to regulate us, get in front
Mm,
of us
yeah, something to that.
somehow.
Yeah.
Maybe there's some of that. I'm just speculating.
Yeah.
But why compete at that level, right? So compete at sensible legislation that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of this doesn't really add up, and I don't really understand any particular tugs of political directions that would be making it so strange.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, I don't. It's a bit too vague and not. I guess, like you said, I mean, this is a field that's moving so fast, and people are are empirically learning uh, how to build applications and solutions, and
Yeah.
so you're basically just telling them, hey, as you're doing that, fill out all this paperwork and look over your shoulder and do all of these things, right? So.
Yeah, it really does sound like trying to reapply regulatory structure from, say, finance into technology, and I don't know that it maps. And it also strikes me that we could wake up 6 months from now and have seen some breakthroughs in LLMs, which are smaller. They don't fit the regulations, but they're being used ubiquitously on, say, smartphones. And maybe there are, safety concerns that we have to point to, but they're completely out of regulatory compliance. So
Right.
that's why I think that this is kind of dangerous in a way.
Right. And so off onto you. What's your
Okay,
first?
thank you. Well, the first one is just a recap on a lot of talk about, or a lot of demonstration and work toward GraphRAG. So the idea of using retrieval augmented generation to try to mitigate hallucinations in LLMs, try to ground them with facts so that you can tie down that, the answers you're getting back are going to be based on the facts, perhaps from your own internal data in your organization. And so, we've seen RAG obviously for a long time now, and now we're seeing much more rise of using knowledge graphs along with RAG. And I wanted to point out over the past, since our last episode, over the past month, I've been at Knowledge Graph Conference in New York City. We were both at the Graph Gathering in San Francisco, and just now I'm at Data Centric Architecture Forum in Fort Collins. And each of these have a lot of GraphRAG being shown by different vendors, different open source projects, also by large enterprise which are using LLMs in production. So I'll reference, there was a great talk by AbbVie, the pharma out of Chicago area. They talked about their use case for LLMs in production inside the pharma, and how they'd compared using RAG versus using GraphRAG approaches. I moderated a track all about this at KYC, and it was interesting because Abby and the two others that were presenting onto text and data.world, they definitely were showing that there's benefit of using a graph to try to tie down the grounding in your LLMs. They also mentioned that something that seems kind of inherent in how RAG is architected, basically having indexes of embeddings. There's Even though you're using a graph, there's still a lot of emphasis on like similarity measures between embeddings. So at the end of the day, these teams are all pointing out to better results by using GraphRAG, but there's still in RAG some inherent limitations, particularly on recall. So like some of the things you would really expect to be coming back from the facts that you're providing, you're still not getting all the facts you would want. I think that looking ahead, we can see that on the graph side of the equation, when you have a knowledge graph, you can move beyond the sort of relatively shallow mechanism for semantics that vector similarity gives you, because that's, however you slice it, vector similarity is really only one hop out. And if you have a graph, then you can start to traverse more. You can do things like semantic random walks and see if there are maybe some really important points that are 2, 3, 4, or more hops out from the initial points that you've tied into because of what the prompt said. And then also, we're seeing some teams start to experiment with using graph analytics like centrality measures, using GraphML to be able to do some link prediction, et cetera, and sort of augment while you're at that stage of preparing what facts need to be presented to the LLMs to get better answers. And there was a great demo that we saw from Neo4j, and it's public. It's online on GitHub. It's called the LLM Graph Builder. Michael Hunger did a really fantastic demo. Definitely go and check that out. I think that gives a lot of indications. Also, there was a major release recently called Property Graph Index from Llama Index, and Jerry Liu had described some of this at a high level, but they've got some great tutorials about that. I've been digging into the code there. And similarly, there are great capabilities out of LangChain and Haystack. But I do think that all of these major open source libraries for incorporating graph into RAG, I do think that they still have a relatively superficial view of A, how to build the graph, and B, how to leverage the graph. And the knowledge graph community is coming in and learning, okay, how can we do this better? And I'll also point out that what this really shows is that there's probably a long road ahead on combining more of the empirical machine learning, statistical AI, if you will, along with the symbolic AI, such as knowledge graphs. Doing these hybrid kind of approaches tends to bring in sort of the best of both worlds. And there's a talk that I'll link from Frank van Harmelen, really great talk about that hybrid AI approaches, and how historically there's kind of been a pendulum swinging back and forth between the two camps. Okay,
Yeah.
over to you, Ben.
Yeah. So I find this space interesting and fascinating. I'm hopeful that the tools are becoming developer accessible. I think for a long time it's been kind of a bit too graphy and a bit too kind of graphy in the sense that it's only graph people who are really digging in. Now it's becoming more democratized, so to speak. And while these early tools may not go as deep into graphs as Paco has described, at least they get developers who are not familiar with graphs that first touch, that first fingertip feel for why would a graph be interesting. So I actually recently co-wrote a post with my friend Prashant, and one of the reasons I wrote that post is I started reading about GraphRAG, but then I realized actually this GraphRAG means different things to different people.
It does, and the Microsoft version actually means something else. Yeah.
So then I decided, let me grab a few posts and kind of try to draw out the architecture for how they implement GraphRAG, and it turns out there's many. And then I finally gave up, and then I just said in the post, here are some, with the keyword there is some, and then just to emphasize the fact that GraphRAG means different things as far as implementing it to different people, but the main ingredient being is that you have RAG, and then you have a knowledge graph somehow as part of the in the mix, and then beyond that, it people may approach it in different ways, and then so one of the key things that we did there too is we compiled a list of advice, and one, the first one being is don't be overly ambitious. Just do something simple and make sure you can do a pipeline from end to end that you can repeat. And then once you get confident that, hey, this graph might be actually adding value, then you can add more complex things. But first, kind of get your feet wet by doing something simple. Make sure you can do it end to end. And actually, a sneak peek next week, the week after this episode airs, I'll have Philip Ratley of Neo4j on the podcast.
Oh, fantastic.
And we'll talk a little more about GraphRAG and trends and graphs. So,
well, and one kind of footnote for what you mentioned there. Yeah, it has been the case that, getting into graphs has been, how should I say, a little bit esoteric, more than a little bit esoteric for a long time. But I'll put in a plug. We've got a workshop where people from software engineering are looking at knowledge graph lifecycle, how to make this much more approachable by software engineers in general, how to apply continuous integration, unit tests, etc. These kind of learnings, coarse grain dependency propagation. And long story short, basically, what we're working on is, can we put up, a language server protocol so that knowledge graph tools plug into tools like VS Code, IntelliJ, the typical IDEs that software engineers are using, and just try to make this put into more software development kinds of language, with also arguably a bit of data engineering added as well. So we're looking for people to collaborate on that. I'll put out a link for the workshop.
all right. So my second item is AI avatars in the workplace. And this was inspired by an interview by the CEO of Zoom, where he mused about, maybe you can have AI-powered digital twins, which, the example he gave, of course, was Zoom-centric, right? So, and this digital twin can attend meetings for you, and so that liberates you from attending the meeting and doing other things, right? So, on paper, again, great idea, but maybe once you think it through, there's things that come up, right? So first of all, I guess like any technology, right? So you can say, does it make sense to even have a digital twin? Maybe you can just record the meeting and then transcribe it, right? So
Yeah.
so that works maybe most of the time, but in the future, maybe you want your digital twin to actually opine on your behalf, maybe, right? So I don't know why you would want to do that, but that would be the reason why a recording is not enough, right? But then once you get into that, right? So there's just too many things that can go wrong, right? So impersonation, number one, right? So I'm the digital twin of the CFO.
Yeah.
So then I can say all sorts of things, right? So I'm the digital twin of your manager and ask you to buy something and send it to this address, right? So and then there's also the decision-making errors, right? So I mean, at this point, I think Paco and I have talked about AI right now. While we're excited about agents, we're realistic that they're quite limited and very early days. The real interesting applications tend to be co-pilots, so human in the loop. So so I guess if in this grand vision there is no human in the loop, the avatar is attending the meeting for you or doing things on your behalf, right?
Yeah.
And then obviously there's the privacy concerns, right? So I mean, in order to train an avatar on in behalf of Paco, can you imagine the amount of data that Paco will have to reveal to this avatar in order for this avatar to be somewhat Paco-like, right? And so on, right? So there's a lot of details. But the point is, I don't think this is a scenario that this is a discussion that will go away, right? So people will start kind of pressing for this. When can we do this? Oh, I have a startup that can do this, or and, and things like that. But but right now, knowing what we know about agents and how fragile and limited they are, I think this is far off. But I think it's worth discussing discussing this possibility at this point, I would say.
Yeah, it's a fascinating area. It does seem like kind of an opportunistic approach from the part of a company like Zoom, because obviously they would have the data for, and also, they have a lot of skin in the game when it comes to having, I don't know, digital twins talk with each other through Zoom. My question there is Zoom really the ideal way for people to do business? Obviously, it's great to have remote tools, but yeah, I don't know. I take it with a grain of salt, and I also I would like to point out there's kind of an interesting counterpoint. One that I really liked recently was Tom Smoker from Waihow has been talking about looking at agents maybe in a narrower scope. If you can define to leverage some knowledge graph terms, if you can think about closed world versus open world. Tom talks about how LLMs are generally very open world, the sky's the limit, they can talk about anything. If instead we can talk about having a very smaller domain that's constrained, that's a closed world, something that's small enough for domain experts to actually understand and validate or update, and then using these as the basis for like a systems of more specialized agents where each one is much more tied down, then I think that provides a different angle on human in the loop for having agents work with each other. And I'll link to a couple of talks that Tom gave. There was one that was not only was it standing room only, there was a line out in the hall with people trying to listen at KGC. Tom was one of the most popular talks. And then he recently did a great interview on ML Ops community too as well.
Yeah, and the reality right now, I think with agents is there's a lot of excitement, but they tend to break,
Yeah.
and also you have to. I guess they make sense when the thing you're trying to do right now is very, very specific. So this is more of a futuristic view of, the AI avatar in many ways is like the agent on steroids, right? So it's starting to represent you in some ways, but I don't. I think that this will be a discussion we will have for a while moving forward, because people are kind of, the people in this field have read enough science fiction.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a double-edged sword. It's interesting because I mean, over the decades, obviously, science fiction kind of leads everything. Sometimes science fiction trails. When you look at Werner Vinge's NASA report, that sort of, the first real report about technical singularity. It was actually NASA Futures Studies wanting to summarize Terminator and like come up with like plausible scenarios for Skynet. So there's this weird relationship between actual technology and science fiction, and it always comes up in the context of AI. But I think that there is a real danger for focusing too much on the science fiction what ifs versus having something pragmatic that's testable, that's reproducible now. And we have too much of the former, not enough of the latter.
All right, Paco, your next topic.
Okay, well, the next one I want to bring up something that's happened, and it's been kind of more in the popular news, but I think we do need to discuss it. And there are really like 4 points I'll bring up here of sort of the LLM hype cycle running headlong into the real world. And so one of these, of course, was where we basically had a face-off between Sam Altman and Taylor Swift, because Altman and OpenAI had gone out to Taylor Swift to try to get her to do, a reprise of her role in Her, the movie Her.
Or Scarlett Johansson, you mean?
Oh yeah, no, sorry. Yeah, boy, I'm really blowing this. Scarlett Johansson, right? So the idea is Scarlett Johansson had been approached to do the voice of a new chatbot, and she turned it down. And just right before doing the release, they'd gone back to her and said, "Are you sure? Can we really get you?" And then she said no, and they released it anyway. And it turned out there was a voice that seemed a lot like Scarlett Johansson. And so there's been a lot of commentary about that. And I thought that some of the remarks from OpenAI and Sam Altman were basically like auditioning for a new part in the sequel to Her. They were really just kind of pushing that science fiction trope out of the movie without recognizing that, hey, they might be getting into some pretty shady business here. And similarly, there was another thing that flared up over the past couple of weeks with like Elon Musk facing off against Jan LeCun, talking about the nature of AI research, about basically public versus private. And of course, Musk is pushing the privatized research and not really giving credit as much to the typical notions of scientific process and research. Whereas Jan LeCun is really pushing about what's being done in AI on the public side, the open side of research. And that led to a lot of back and forth. LeCun is taking increasingly more of maybe a cynical view of some of the hype cycle that's been coming out. And the third one is that now we are seeing the SEC file charges based on like investors overinflating, making misleading claims about AI investments. So there have been two investment advisors who've been charged by SEC, and we're starting to see court activity, criminal activity in this area. And just the fourth thing I'll bring out, of course, this feeds into is you had an article about learning from the past, comparing the hype cycles of big data and Gen AI. So we're starting to see some contrast there, and it's interesting. Unfortunately, it's happening at the same time as what we mentioned before about like the Senate trying to put in, or California Senate trying to put in regulations. But we're definitely seeing reality hit the hype cycle.
Actually, my point of discussion with all the things you brought up is to add one more thing, which is I wrote a piece about Tesla recently, basically analyzing where is the growth of Tesla going to come from.
Okay, yeah.
And one of the things that obviously Tesla is pointing out is robotaxis, right? So, but then if you drill down, so robotaxi, so first of all, the Tesla self-driving, they have to actually overcome a lot of skeptics, right? Because basically, other self-driving technology use cameras, LiDAR, and radar. Right now, Tesla is, I think, cameras only. Maybe they'll use radar. I doubt if they'll use LiDAR. I mean, because Elon doesn't seem to. Elon, first of all, thinks he can get by with cameras only, I believe, right? So, and then secondly, okay, so that's self-driving. But then the robotaxi service is actually more than just the technology, right? So if you think it through, if what Waymo has hinted at in the past, right? So first of all, they work closely with regulators. So if there's an incident, they report it, and then they work closely with regulators. So you have to have that in place. And then secondly, they actually have human operators monitoring these vehicles. They don't disclose, right? So we don't know the number of vehicles. Like an operator may be monitoring, I don't know, I'm just making this up, 10 vehicles, right? So if a vehicle gets in trouble, maybe there's an alert, and then they help it navigate, right? So it's not like you just kind of have Wild West, where you just kind of implement a robotaxi service, with a bunch of cars with no infrastructure and no coordination with regulators in place. So that's what I'm gonna say there as far as everything you've mentioned. So one other thing is in the Musk LeCun discussion, I just got very initial of it. I didn't realize that it kind of led into the closed versus open.
Yeah.
Because I thought that the whole Elon's beef with OpenAI is not open enough. So I thought he wants to be the anti-OpenAI, plus the fact that maybe he wants to have an AI that's probably less woke, right? So with
Right.
less guardrails, right? So I thought that was the whole point. So I'm actually surprised that now is he weighing more into the close area?
Well, I mean, he was taking issue. He was saying that Lacune doesn't really represent research, that it's up to private corporations to do the research in AI.
Oh, I see.
And but it does bleed over, and yeah, I mean, you kind of get the sense there's not really a reliable narrator going on whenever it comes to anything coming out of Musk. It just kind of goes whatever happens to be convenient at the time.
All right. So my next issue is two quickies, two announcements that are completely unrelated. So forgive me, Paco. So the first one is the announcement from Anthropic, right? So where they scale dictionary learning, and basically the idea here is that these very large models are opaque, and you don't exactly know how they are making decisions, right? So, and there's many ways that people are trying to understand how to build tools for explaining or improving transparency. So one technique that I guess Anthropic figured out how to scale is dictionary learning. So it involves finding patterns of activity within an AI model. So I guess think of an AI model as a machine with many gears and levers, and then dictionary learning is trying to figure out what each gear does by observing how it moves, right? So the point there is that they were able to scale it, but what they did was, do it for their model, right? So in the post I wrote, I said I kind of laid out the things they did, but then I kind of closed it with a call to arms where, maybe we can have someone from the Ray community implement this for Llama 3.
Interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
right. So,
Expand that.
and then my second unrelated announcement is good news for the future of Lakehouses. So Databricks, the company that I advise, that Paco was involved with very early on, the creators of Delta, the Lakehouse format Delta, acquired Tabular, which is the company created by the creators of Apache Iceberg. So now you have the two open formats for Lakehouse architecture in the same company. So that will eliminate fragmentation and maybe increase industry adoption. So actually, which got me thinking, Paco, as you were talking, right? So about graphs. So I'm all over the map, right? So dictionary learning, Lakehouse, and now graphs. So when you were talking about graphs, right? So AI is going to be everywhere, right? So our thesis is that AI benefits from knowledge or structured information, right? So we know for a fact that even metadata benefits AI, right? So metadata filtering. So we're hopeful that knowledge graphs will help, right? So and we believe that will be the case, right? So if that's the case, AI will be everywhere because AI is doing electricity, right? So then you will have to have graphs that be everywhere as well, right? So you will need to have the ability to take the data in your lakehouse and do graph analytics on it, right? So, and there's some early startups in there. But then you also would probably need a graph all over the place, right? So as you're on your phone, on your web browser, right? So the embedded model, kind of the DuckDB for graphs, which
exactly.
we
personal.
We have a startup in that area now as well, right? So Kuzu. So anyway, so as you were talking, I was thinking about, if AI is everywhere, graphs may be everywhere, so graph technology has to be everywhere. So three things. dictionary learning, Lakehouses, and graph technology becoming much more all over.
Great, great. And I'll just add that there is a lot of dialogue about personal knowledge graphs, which I think really speaks to what you're describing in the latter point, Evo and others. Okay, I'll give a recommendation. Well, sorry.
Yeah. You can go with recommendations if you want. Yeah.
Or rapid fire. My rapid fire thing is we'll link to it, but there was a nice tutorial about using Gen AI to evaluate bias in speeches by Amber Roberts. It's published on the Arise blog. And Amber Roberts had used an LLM to in a very structured, methodical way to go through analysis of Harris and Butker's address, basically using prompt templates to try to formalize how to analyze for misogyny, homophobia, etc. It's a really interesting exploration of how to use language models to analyze language. And obviously this is what they're intended for, but I do think that it's really important as we're talking about AI safety. This is something that's very tangible, and it's probably going to become more and more of an issue too as we see so-called deep fakes emerging, particularly in an election year. So I'll shout out then to this tutorial from Amber Roberts. The other thing is, I think that by the time this episode comes out, we may be right on top of, I'll be speaking at AI Quality Conference on June 25th. I'm not sure if we'll have time. That may have already happened by the time this comes out, but there's a lot of dialogue about AI quality. I'll be talking there, talking about entity resolved knowledge graphs. And the third thing that I'll throw in is just, again, a pointer to our workshop about software engineering in knowledge graph lifecycle. That'll be at ISWC in Baltimore in November, and we'll link to it. We're calling for papers, open source projects, posters. If you want to get involved as a guinea pig and work on IDEs for graphs, let us know.
All right, so I'll close with recommendations focused on audio. Okay, so the first one is text to music. It's a website called udio.com, udio.com.
Yeah.
So it's a different kind of generative AI for those of you who haven't tried kind of playing around with audio. And then the second, of course, is a startup I'm involved with, which is meaning.team. They do speech synthesis, right? So real-time speech to speech. So check it out. So audio, don't sleep on audio is my recommendation.
Okay, excellent. Okay, I already covered my recommendation there, but again, think about data engineering and software engineering when you're thinking about using graphs with LLMs. This is a trend that we're tracking, and I'm very glad to see it.
And with that, thank you, Paco.
Thank you, Ben.